Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. So altogether, I hold about 25 different metals in my portfolio. I thought I would talk about all the elements that I've hoarded over the years, since the beginning of my metal investing career. The first metal I ever invested in was actually silver. I was in eighth grade when I discovered that if you go to the bank and buy a roll of half dollars, occasionally you would find a silver coin. And I drove my parents crazy about it because I was spending way too much time searching rolls of half dollars. One day I was eating dinner with my parents, and I blurted out to my mom, asking her if she could loan me $500. What had happened was our local bank had $500 worth of half dollars. I wanted to get them to search. I was buying them a roll or two at a time, and it was just too time consuming. And I so badly wanted to take home all of the coins to search at one time. I thought my mom would be receptive to the idea. After all, we could take the coins home and we could all dig in and search together, right? It could be a family bonding event. That's what I was envisioning. Instead, my mom thought I was crazy. And she said that I needed to focus on my studies because when I grow up and get a job, I can earn a lot more than a few silver coins. And she was right, but I was thinking this was a family event. This wasn't, I'm going to get rich quick kind of event, right? After all, we did occasionally play the lottery or something like that, right? Nobody expected to get rich playing the lottery. It was a fun event, right? That's what I was thinking. But my mom misinterpreted it. Eventually, I started searching for copper coins and then nickel coins. Canadian nickels made before 1981 are made of nickel. And then I went out to go pursue my PhD. My first year at my PhD program, the financial crisis happened and palladium prices crashed. And I bought a bunch of palladium when it was $300 an ounce. Did pretty well. I traded some of the palladium for other metals eventually, but I still have a few ounces. I bought my first gold coin in 2010. At the time, gold was pretty high, and so what I did was I bought double eagles because with gold at 1700, which was a high at the time, double eagles were barely going above that, and I thought it's relatively low risk, right? If gold goes up, it takes the double eagle with it. If it goes down, the double eagle would still be a collectible. That was my logic, and I think it has turned out very well. And then that year, platinum started trading below gold, and has remained so for the last decade and a half. And I bought my first 1 ounce platinum coin in 2012. Eventually, I discovered that Japanese 1 yen coins are made of aluminum, and I like the Japanese yen. I've been wrong over the last decade, but I'm still, in the long term, I still think it's a much sounder currency than the US dollar. I started go. I've always been a big fan of going to thrift shops, and I learned how to look for pewter items that year. Pewter being an alloy of tin and antimony for the most part. And so for the better part of a decade, those were the only metals that I had until 2 years ago. I learned about bismuth and making crystals out of bismuth. And eventually I graduated to a few other metals in my art projects. I acquired some indium. Haven't really worked with it yet. Indium's kind of a little messier to work with in terms of how to melt it, and it's also considerably more toxic than bismuth. A friend of mine gave me some ammunition. He owns a shooting range. And then I eventually bought some cadmium and thallium at a good price. Cadmium and thallium are pretty rare, and for the price that they're going for, although I wouldn't recommend working with them with my art projects, although I have dreams of doing it at some point. I need the right PPE, obviously. I also bought some tellurium crystals off of Alibaba at a pretty good price. Eventually, I started working with zinc. for my art projects, as you saw, mostly with pennies, believe it or not. I bought a cube of tungsten to decorate. It's heavy, and I decorated it into a doubling cube for backgammon. I did anodization of titanium, and then I followed it up with tantalum, which also anodizes. I bought some rhenium turnings just as an investment. It doesn't really make any sort of art, but rhenium is one of the rarest non-radioactive elements in the Earth's crust. I bought a really sensitive Geiger counter, and I discovered that household dust is somewhat radioactive. And if I tried to isolate the polonium out of the reason household dust is radioactive is that when radon decays, it turns into polonium, which is positively charged, which then sticks into the dust around the household. And the last metal that I worked with recently was niobium, which I also did anodization on. And there's my portfolio right there. Now, historically, it seems like every year, every other year, one of these metals does a 10-bagger of some sort, right? Not long ago, it was iridium. At one point, it was rhodium. Rhenium has did that before, just before the financial crisis. Obviously, the Hunt brothers and bismuth had its day just before the financial crisis. And in the 1970s, at the beginning of the semiconductor boom. And tellurium will probably have its day with the solar panels, right? And indium had its day too at one point in time, right? At one point, it was worth hundreds of times more than gold, right? So if any of these hits a 10-bagger, right, I'll be ready for that, and then I'll probably rebalance my portfolio at that point, right? In theory, I probably should rebalance out of gold and especially into silver and bismuth right at this moment. The gold to silver ratio, earlier today somebody asked me if I would sell my silver right now, but the gold to silver ratio is still historically way too high, right? 70 or 80, or I think at one point it was close to 90 as well, even recently. And until it gets down to 50 or 60, it's pretty risk-free, right? I can't imagine in the long term gold to silver going any higher, right? If nothing else, even if they crash, I still expect gold to silver to go down. So imagine both gold and silver go down, but now the ratio is closer to 60. Well, you could trade your silver for gold at that point, and you're probably not going to take that big of a bath, right?